Hello there. So I'd like to make for you three very short lectures on beauty. Specifically, we're going to look at the philosophy of beauty, or what is called the Analytic of the Beautiful, that was written by a great German philosopher named Immanuel Kant. Kant was born in 1724 and he died in 1804. And he's one of the great thinkers we have in our Western tradition. He wrote an enormous body of works, and I just want to concentrate on one part of one book. That book is called The Critique of Judgment. And in that book, in part one of that book, the first part of part one is called Analytic of the Beautiful. And that Analytic of the Beautiful is divided into four, what he calls moments. They're not really moments like in time, but aspects. He calls them moments. So I'm just going to make four very short discussions where I'm trying to paraphrase Kant's discussion of these four moments of the judgments of taste, or what he calls judgments of the beautiful. So the way Kant approaches this is that he assumes that people have experiences of beautiful things. And instead of trying to offer a definition of what is beautiful, like that father of idealism, Plato, did, this later German idealist, namely Kant, decides to approach it differently. Instead of trying to give a definition of the beautiful, what he's doing is assuming that people do, at times, experience beautiful phenomena. We have experiences of the beautiful. Now, he uses the expression judgment of taste, that we make a judgment about something that it's beautiful. So whether or not we say, I judge that to be beautiful, what's going on in our mind is that we're making a judgment. And he calls those judgments of taste. But basically, it's an experience of the beautiful. But let's use Kant's language. What I'm going to try to do to help you is to paraphrase. The more you study philosophy and the more you mature as a thinker, you realize how important the art of paraphrasing is, because part of the problem of understanding philosophy is the language that these philosophers are using. Part of it is just distant in time from us. They spoke differently. Part of it is that they're from different countries and they spoke different languages, and then those languages are translated into English and something is lost in the translation. But also, and I think this is probably the most important reason why it's so difficult to read philosophy, they're struggling with opening up a completely new way of seeing things. In fact, that's what philosophy is. They're creating modes of disclosure. You know, a philosopher is part artist and part scientist. And he's an artist because he's creating something. And she's a scientist because she's discovering something. So if we combine creativity and discovery, then you come up with this formula that what philosophy is doing is creating modes or ways of revealing reality that had been concealed hitherto. So the very fact that they're struggling with opening up a whole new way of seeing something, of understanding something, that puts language at the test. And so they start struggling with neologism. They come up with new words, and the sentences become very long sometimes, especially in this tradition of German idealism, in which Kant belongs. Sometimes the sentences are 2 and 3 pages long. And then in German, the verb comes at the end, and sometimes the verb is broken down in pieces, and it becomes quite difficult. So I'm going to do my best to paraphrase. I'm going to just try to put it into plain English. But I think what you should do as students is to actually read the text and then listen to my talk and try to do that same activity. Try to put it into your own words. I'm going to help you do that. So I'll try to extract from you in plain English what Kant is saying. So I was starting to tell you that what Kant is, the way he approaches the issue of beauty then, in this analytic of the beautiful, he assumes that we do have experiences of the beautiful. That's a given. He doesn't try to prove that there is such a thing as a beautiful. He doesn't try to define what is beautiful. He's just saying there are, at times, we have these moments where we make judgments of things and we experience beauty. And this is a very important part of human existence. And so the way he approaches it then is to ask, what are the conditions that make possible this experience? In other words, we do have experiences of the beautiful. We do make judgments of taste. And those judgments are accompanied by a particular kind of feeling. So what are the conditions that make possible that? In other words, when we do experience something as beautiful, what's going on in our subjectivity such that we can experience the beautiful? Now, another way of approaching it, which is, it's the same approach, but another way of explaining it is he shows that our judgments of taste or judgments of the beautiful are different from other kinds of judgments. So he lays out other kinds of judgments. He'll talk about cognitive judgments, and we'll talk about that in a moment. He'll talk about judgments of the pleasant. He'll talk about judgments of the useful, judgments of the good in itself. And he's showing this is the realm of ethics. This is the realm of practical utility. This is the realm of cognition, of logical cognition, of knowledge and understanding. This is the realm, and so he's showing it's not this, it's not that, it's not that, then what is it? And then he demarcates that out. So that's another maybe clarifying thing to keep in mind. He's showing when we experience something as beautiful, it has nothing to do with morality. It has nothing to do with logical cognition. It has something to do with understanding, but it's not based on the understanding. And it's very different from judgments of the pleasant. So I'll just make 4 little short videos, and each one is going to concentrate on one of the 4 moments. The other thing I'd like to say in a preliminary way is each of these 4 moments sort of grow out of each other. That's the beauty. That's part of the beauty of what he's doing. He lays out moment 1, and then moment 2 grows naturally out of moment 1. And then moment 3 grows naturally out of 1 and 2, and 4 naturally out of 1, 2, and 3. So they fit together in a very tight-knit way. And when he's done, he has his disclosure of what are the conditions that make possible our experience of the beautiful. So the first moment then of the analytic of the beautiful has 5 sections. Okay, and I'll try to paraphrase each of these 5 sections, but you should read the primary text also and then think about it in light of what I'm saying, and break it down into these 4 moments the way we're doing. So the first section of the first moment, so the first moment has 5 sections. The first section is entitled The Judgment of Taste, and as soon as you hear that word, just think of making judgments about the beautiful. Judgments of taste and judgments of the beautiful are synonyms for Kant. Okay. Judgments of taste is aesthetical. So now, remember I told you one of the keys to doing philosophy well is to realize that all the key words have to be returned to who said it in the context in which they said it. And the meaning of those words is going to be reduced to who said it in the context, because the word aesthetic in other philosophers means something else. So you always have to return the key words to who said it. So what we're trying to find out is what Kant means by aesthetic. The word itself means that which gives itself to the senses. You've heard the word anesthetic, right? So an anesthetic is something that deadens your sensibilities. So an aesthetic is what opens up your sensibilities. But Kant, and this is one part where I disagree with Kant, there's so much I agree with on Kant and so much I disagree with on Kant. Let me just pause right there and make just a very short digression. Another maturity that comes to you as you study philosophy is you realize that these philosophers, you're not going to agree with everything. So you might disagree with one part and agree with other parts. And so, but that's the critical part of doing philosophy, where you're evaluating what you think, what somebody has said. So just because you disagree with certain aspects of a philosopher's thinking, that doesn't mean there are other aspects that are absolutely valuable and open your mind to seeing something you've never seen before. So that's the more mature way of approaching. So the reason I went into that short digression about doing philosophy is when Kant uses the word aesthetic, he plays down the sensuous part of that. And by sensuous, I mean the part that appeals to the five senses, to our body, and like color and timbre of music and those kinds of things. So that's the part I disagree with Kant, but let's not worry about what we disagree or agree with for now. At first, but there's a little bit of advice. At first, when you're studying a philosopher, just try to understand what he or she is saying first. Don't try to criticize things before you understand it. Then later, after you feel like you understand it, then of course, you try to evaluate what you're learning, and then you need to figure out what you agree with and what you don't agree with. But for now, let's just try to understand. So what does Kant mean by aesthetic if it's not that which gives itself to the senses? Well, the first thing he says is the judgment of taste, which is judgments about the beautiful, are aesthetic because the representation, now we just have to go slowly and think about what he's saying. When we experience something, there's a little picture in our minds of that thing. We represent it to ourselves. Like when I look at a tree, for example, in my mind, I have this I represent the tree in my mind. That's all he means by that. So there's like an image in our mind. The representation of the judgments of taste. So when I experience something as beautiful, that representation that I have in my mind, it's not made meaningful based on our understanding or on concepts, but rather the representation is filtered through the imagination, okay, the imagination. And then it resides in the subject. So what can we learn from that if I just paraphrase that in plain English? What he means that when we experience something as beautiful, when we make judgments of taste, it's not a cognitive judgment. We're not learning anything new about that thing. Now, we may learn something, but our experience of the beautiful is not based on our understanding. Like if I walk into a cathedral and I'm filled with this awe of the beauty of the cathedral, it's not based on how much I know about the cathedral, what pope made it, what architect made it, whether it was Brunelleschi. Now that may enhance our experience because the imagination is going to play freely with the understanding. So the more you know about an artwork, the richer your experience will be. But Kant is saying it's not a cognitive judgment. It's not based on knowledge. So when you go into a museum, you don't go there to learn things. Think about it. If that were the case, then all you need to do is go into the library. They have or just go online. If you want to learn about the Taj Mahal, then go online or get a book and you learn everything about the Taj Mahal. There are historians who focus on Indian art, and there's whole books written on the Taj Mahal. You can learn everything you need. You don't need to go to India to learn that, right? and how different it is to walk into the Taj Mahal. I've done that actually twice in Agra, and it's it's the most beautiful building I've ever seen. It's like it came from outer space in a place where they made buildings more beautiful than they make them on Earth. And it just landed here. It's celestial and gorgeous. My experience of the beauty of that building is not based on my knowledge of that building. That's not to say that that knowledge is worthless, because as Kant will say later, the imagination is going to play freely with the understanding. So knowing that Shah Jahan made that as a mausoleum to his wife who died giving birth to his child, or that he had Italians come there and through this process of pietra dura, they put semi-precious gems in particular place and so on. All that knowledge, and I gained a lot of knowledge before I even went there, so I wouldn't have to deal with guides and things like that. That's all wonderful to know all that, and that helps to enhance your experience. But the feeling of beauty is not based on that. So he makes a big distinction, and he's going to go into depth on that later. He just mentions it in the first section of the first moment, that judgments of taste are aesthetical. They're not cognitive. And what he means by that is it's not based on knowledge. So if you watch a movie with Fred Astaire dancing with Ginger Rogers, for example, you don't even need to know who is Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. You probably don't know, you're young people. You know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who these two people are. It's just watch them dance, and if you have taste, you'll experience it as beautiful. So there's a particular feeling that's aroused when we make judgments of taste, and that feeling is not based on the understanding, but rather the imagination. More specifically, the imagination is playing freely with the understanding. If I were to say the Taj Mahal is one of the great wonders of the world in Agra, that's a statement that gives information. But if I'm standing before the Taj Mahal and I experience the beauty of it, that's not a cognitive judgment. It's not based on knowledge. So that's why he says, the judgment of taste then results in a feeling of pleasure or pain by which nothing in the object is signified. So you don't even need to know that it's a mausoleum for his 13th wife and that she's actually buried there and he's buried there. You know, you don't need to know that. If you know that, that's fine. You can imagine, you know, how your imagination could play freely with that, and it could be part of your experience, but it's not based on that. So that's he's going to go into depth on that later on, but he mentions it. And the big thing in section 1 then is it's a subjective thing. Feelings of the beautiful are subjective. See, if I say the Taj Mahal is made of marble, that's objective because I have a concept, marble, and I can take that. It can be proven one way or the other. Is the Taj Mahal made of marble? And so if I have anybody who has a concept of marble and they see the Taj Mahal, then they can see it's marble. And so it's universal and it's objective. But when I experience the Taj Mahal's beauty, it's something subjective. It's a feeling. It's a particular kind of feeling. And he's going to articulate that feeling in due time. So that's the gist of section 1 of the first moment. Section 2, he says, and this is the most important part of the first moment, the satisfaction which determines the judgment of taste is disinterested. Now that became a big theme in aesthetical theory. Not all aestheticians or philosophers of art agree with that. But it became an important theme. A lot of uh, thinkers do agree with Kant. Some disagree. But what are they agreeing or disagreeing about? Here's how to clarify that. When you hear the word interest, the way Kant uses it, just think desire. Desire. So if I desire something, I'm interested in it. And the other piece you need for this section is that if you desire something, it's very important that that thing exists. It can't be just a figment. It can't be like something it can't be like, if I desire unicorns, it's important that there exist unicorns, not just in the figments of poets' imagination, but in real life. So if I desire a banana, it's important that the banana exists. If I experience the beauty of the banana, it's a different story. The banana doesn't have to exist. So what he means by this, the satisfaction which determines the judgment of taste is disinterested. He means that we don't desire the existence of the object in any way. We just let it be. So if I look at something, if I look at some grapes and I'm thirsty, and I look at them and I think, oh, these grapes could quench my thirst, then I'm not going to see the beauty of the grapes. Or if I look at some land and I'm thinking, maybe I should invest my money in land and then parcel it off, and then I can sell it as lots and I could make 100% profit on this land. All I see is dollar signs. I don't see the meadow. I don't see the forest. I don't see the flowers in that meadow. I mean, I may see them, but that's not what my experience is all about. I'm not seeing the beauty of the land. I'm seeing dollar signs. So, or have you ever met someone and you can see they want to get something from you, and you can see that they don't see you. They just see their own desires. So what Kant is really emphasizing is that whenever anyone experiences something as beautiful, they have to let it be. They can't desire it in any way. There's no interest. So the judgments of taste are disinterested. And what clarifies that, and the reason he talks about the existence or non-existence of the object, is in order for something to be desired, it has to exist. But the judgment of taste is blind to whether it exists or not. So like if we're watching a movie and we know that this is complete fiction, but we see the beauty of it, it's possible because we know it doesn't exist. But if I desire something, it has to exist. So the judgment of taste is disinterested. There's no desire. In the third section, he says the satisfaction of the pleasant is bound up with interest. What he means by that is, remember I told you at the beginning, one way he approaches the experience of the beautiful or judgments of taste is by delineating other realms, like that it's not based on. It's not based on concepts or understanding. It's not logical judgments. So what he's saying is this: if there are certain things that certain people have an inclination towards because of their idiosyncrasies, like I happen to like Indian food, since I mentioned the Taj Mahal, made me think of India. So that's just an idiosyncrasy about me. Some people hate Indian food. And what Kant is saying here is that when it comes to taste, when it comes to the pleasant or what gratifies, it's based on inclination. And those inclinations are rooted in my own idiosyncrasies, what makes me different from everyone else. So someone may like turtle soup and someone may not like turtle soup. Nobody gets all bent out of shape about that. If you know, if somebody doesn't like fish and someone likes fish, it's fine. You just happen to be a person that doesn't like fish. But if you really love this piece of music and you share it with your friend and they say, yeah, I really don't like it that much, it becomes an issue. Now, Kant is not saying that you should always agree with everybody, but what he's saying is that judgments of taste are universal. Not that everyone will agree, but we assume that everyone will agree. We need to talk more carefully about that. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here. All he's saying in the second section of moment one is that he's delineating another realm that looks like experience of the beautiful, judgments of taste, but it's not. It's judgments of the pleasant. So it sounds like he's making hairline distinctions, and he is. But sometimes those hairline distinctions are an abyss when you're dealing with important topics like the beautiful. By the way, as an aside, it's very difficult to talk about the beautiful. A lot of people don't know what to do in front of art. It takes a while to start thinking about it, and these philosophers can help. I mean, I've learned a lot from Kant, but I told you I disagree with Kant, but on other things. And it helps to actually expose yourself to art and go to these places and see it, and then when time goes by, your taste develops, and your appreciation of art enhances. But a lot of people don't know what to do about art. They think they're supposed to learn stuff. And I always think to myself, then just go in the library. If you want to learn about art, then just take a course in art history or get an art history book, and you can learn everything. So why would anyone want to actually put themselves before a masterpiece rather than just read about it? See, that's an important question. It's a rhetorical question. The answer to that, Kant has given the answer, because when you're actually before the work of art, you can experience an aesthetic judgment. Whereas if you're reading about the work, unless you're looking at the photograph and you're enjoying the beauty of it, that's another thing. But if you're just reading about it and learning things, that's cognitive judgment. That's a logical judgment. So many people make that important. This is the most valuable thing I've learned from Kant, actually, if I'm honest, that the aesthetic judgment is not a cognitive judgment. And once you internalize that and you really understand what that means, maybe I should, let me just give you a digression on this. Well, I'll do that later when we come to that. Let's wait. Let me just move through systematically. I was going to give you an example from my life where there's a big distinction between cognitive and aesthetic judgments, but we'll wait because he's going to specifically focus on that in another moment coming up. So all he's talking about, when it comes to the five senses, like taste, smell, touch, hearing, and sight, those are based on, he calls those judgments of the pleasant. So I may like the color blue, and I love the color blue. I like how it sucks me into. Other people like red, because it comes right out. Other people like green. It gives them this feeling of well-being and so on. So some people have different idiosyncrasies. Some are inclined toward blue, toward red, toward green, and that's all right. That's the way it should be. There's no problem, because judgments of the pleasant are subjective, like judgments of taste, but they're particular. This is the key thing. Okay, judgments of the pleasant are subjective, just like judgments of taste. Remember, judgments of taste are judgments of the beautiful. Judgments of the pleasant are based on the five senses. They're both subjective, unlike cognitive judgments, which are objective. Remember I was talking about the Taj Mahal made of marble. That's a cognitive judgment because I'm giving information based on that concept, marble. So judgments of the pleasant are subjective, but they're particular. What does he mean by particular? Particular. What does he mean? He means when I have that experience, I know I feel that this is what pleases me. It may not please you. Okay, like the Taj Mahal is pink marble. Part of it has a pink kind of hue to it. It's very fine marble that they got when they made it. So some people just don't like the color pink. Other people like the color pink. The fact that some people like it and some people don't, that means it's particular. It's subjective, but it's particular. But judgments of the beautiful, or what he calls judgments of taste, they too are subjective, but they're universal. Now he's going to talk about that universality later. But all he means by that universality, he doesn't mean that everyone will agree empirically. Like if I hear a piece of music and I really love it and I share it with somebody and they don't like it, that doesn't criticize Kant's position. He's just saying when I do experience the beauty of that music, I assume that others will find it beautiful also. But when we have the pleasant, when we experience something as pleasant, and that's more based on the five senses, there's interest there. Because I like pink, I like Indian food, and so it's subjective, but it's particular. Whereas judgments of taste are subjective and they're universal. By universal, he means I assume that others will find it beautiful also. But judgments of the pleasant, I don't make that assumption. It's fine. If you don't like Indian food, that's fine. So it's all based on your idiosyncrasy. So you can read section 3, and he talks about the satisfaction of the pleasant, and it's bound up with interest. In order to find something pleasant, it has to exist. But in order to find something beautiful, so the existence thing, that sort of throws me off. It threw me off for a long time. In fact, I would play it down to try to understand it. Whenever you hear the word interest in Kant, just think desire. But the way he's thinking is that if you desire something, then it has to exist. Whereas with the judgments of taste, it doesn't matter if it exists or not. So if there's some foliage of plant life, vines growing, it doesn't, and I see this pattern there. Or I look inside of a seashell and I see a particular spiral pattern. It doesn't matter that it's a seashell or whatever. I can let my imagination, my understanding play freely. And that shape itself, that spiraling shape, or that interlacing of the foliage of the plants, or maybe the Celtic designs, that you see in the jewelry and all those interlacing things, they're not, that design is not something, but it pleases. The fourth section, so he's demarcating out these realms, right? The aesthetic judgment is not a cognitive judgment. He's going to go into detail on that later on. It's not based on knowledge. So we don't go into museums to learn stuff. To say it in kind of crude English. You may learn something by going to a museum. You look at a piece of work, artwork, and you see this was Paul Klee made this painting, and this is the name of it, and this is when he did it, and so on and so forth. So you learn something. But your experience of the beautiful of that painting is not based on that knowledge. That's all he's saying. Now, the fourth moment, he says the satisfaction of the good is bound up with interest. Now, for Kant, there's two kinds of good. Okay, there's the good as useful, and there's the good in itself. The good as useful is When something is useful, that means it serves some purpose well. So if I have a lawnmower that cuts grass well and does a really good, clean job and doesn't mess up, then it's a good lawnmower. But there's always some purpose involved in that. That this lawnmower serves the proper function of lawnmowers well, namely it cuts grass well. So there's always a purpose, and that's the good as useful. And there's always an interest there. It's important that I desire this lawnmower because it serves its proper function well. Or it doesn't have to be a lawnmower, it can be anything, right? So if I say somebody has good eyes, and I'm speaking in terms of how well these eyes serve that proper function of the eyes, namely to see. So this person has 20/20 vision, or 20/15 even. Those are good eyes, because those eyes serve that proper function of the eyes, which is to see. But if I say someone has beautiful eyes, those eyes may not even be able to see very well, and they can be beautiful. So there's the good as useful. If I have good ears, that means I hear well. But if they're disproportionate and they're silly looking, then I won't experience the beauty of those ears in the face. So that's the good as useful. Now, and then there's also the good in itself. So the good as useful is a means. The good in itself is judged as an end unto itself. So he's thinking of the morally good. And in both cases, desire plays a part. There's interest. I have an interest in this lawnmower. I have an interest in having my eyes serve the proper function of the eye, which is to see, and so on. So in the useful, there's always interest. So that's the good as useful. But the good in itself, that's the morally good. And we esteem that. So if I see somebody or read about someone whose desires are being checked by their reason and they're acting as they ought to, then I esteem that. I respect that person. And I want to emulate that. I want to be that way myself. So it's bound up with interest. So the good as useful and the good. So there's a film, I was thinking about this film, Swing Time, this old Hollywood classic with Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers. One of Lucky is Fred Astaire's name in the film. He's got a protege who's a gambler, and he's a shady kind of guy. In fact, he's a con man. And in the film, he makes these cons. So a con man is not a virtuous person because they're not truthful, right? So, but yet the film is beautiful, even that character could be seen as beautiful because he plays that role of being a con man so well. And we know he's not really a con man, we know he's an actor, right? So even though the person is being depicted as a con man, which is something unethical, it still can show itself as beautiful because of the way the person acts that role in the beautiful way that he embodies that role of a con man. But if in real life we see somebody who's a con man, then we don't desire to be that way. There's a big difference in knowing how to be an actor and how to act as a con man and looking at somebody who's really a con man and actually emulating that. So he's saying that the good in itself is bound up with interest because we esteem to be that way. We desire to be that way. Desire is interest. So do you see what he's doing? He's going through all these different realms. He's saying judgments of taste are not cognitive judgments. They're aesthetic judgments and they're subjective. He's going to return to that later. Then he goes judgments of taste are not judgments of the pleasant. Judgments of the pleasant are subjective, yes, but they're particular and they're bound up with interest. And then he goes into judgments of the good, the realm of morality and the realm of utility. The good as useful is bound up with interest. The good as the morally good, the good in itself, bound up with interest. So the only thing that's disinterested is the aesthetic judgment. And what he does in section 5 then, the last section, he compares his discussion of what he's been talking about and puts them all together to clarify. So there's 3 kinds of satisfaction. That which merely pleases, that's going to be judged, the satisfaction one gains, that feeling that one experiences when we make judgments of taste, when we experience the beautiful. And those are aesthetic judgments, okay? That's what we're trying to delineate, the aesthetic judgment, or the judgment of taste, or judgments of the beautiful. There's that which is pleasant, and that is bound up with interest, and it's bound up with our own idiosyncrasies, and it's bound up with our 5 senses, and it's particular. In other words, it pleases me, it may not please you. And then there's that which is, there's the satisfaction in the good as useful, and the good in itself. And those 2 are also bound up with interest, as we just said. Of the 3, only the latter 2 are bound up with interest. That is, are interested in the existence of the object or action. With regard to that which is esteemed, that is the morally good, the satisfaction is a pure practical satisfaction in the connection of the subject with the existence of the action. There goes my dogs. So I'm almost done. So here. Oh boy. The lawnmower people and the dogs. Okay, I think you can still hear me though. I just want to finish this. I don't want to turn this off because I'll have to start all over again. All right, so there's 3 different forms of the feeling of pleasure and pain. There's the beautiful, there's the pleasant, and there's the good. And the good has these 2 kinds of good. The good is useful and the good in itself. Only the beautiful is disinterested, okay? The other thing that I think is worth pointing out is, of all 3 kinds of satisfaction that he talks about in moment 1, that of taste in the beautiful is alone disinterested, and because of that, it's the only free beauty. It's the only free satisfaction. It's free of concepts, it's free of inclinations, it's free of desires, it's free from all of that. So that experience is an experience of free satisfaction. Because no interest in either the sense or reason forces our assent. He gives different words to these 3 things too. And you might want to, pay attention to that. The satisfaction of the aesthetic judgment, that is, judgments of the beautiful, are related to favor. He uses the word favor. That of the pleasant is connected to inclination. That's going to be an important point later on, because it's going to be based on our particular inclinations, our particular idiosyncrasies. And that of the good is connected with respect. We respect the moral law. So of the 3, favor is the only free satisfaction. And one of the appealing parts of Kant's Analytic of the Beautiful is that after having discussed this, he gives one sentence that delineates the conditions that make possible the beautiful. and it summarizes everything in one sentence. So this would be a good sentence to when you quote something, it's nice to quote summaries. When people are summarizing something, it's nice to quote that, because that way you can bring out the meaning of that in ways that would support your point a lot better. Because a summary is pregnant with a lot of meaning there. So that last summary is this: taste is by taste he means judgments of the beautiful, right? Taste is the faculty of judging an object or a method of representing it by an entirely disinterested satisfaction. The object of such satisfaction is called beautiful. So do you see how he approaches the beautiful? He thinks about what are the conditions that make possible the beautiful. The object of these conditions, that's going to be something beautiful. So he's going to the conditions for the possibility of our experience of something beautiful. Like I said at the beginning, he assumes that at times we do experience something as beautiful. So what are the conditions that make possible that experience, that judgment? And right now he's saying, when we represent that thing to ourselves in a disinterested way, and there's a feeling of disinterested satisfaction, a satisfaction that's not based on knowledge, it's not a cognitive judgment, it's not based on sensation or inclination, it's not based on something useful, it's not beautiful because it's useful, and it's not beautiful because it's morally good either. So when something is beautiful, it's not beautiful because it gives us knowledge. It's not beautiful because it gives us a kind of sensuous pleasure, because it's pleasant. It's not beautiful because it's useful. It's not beautiful because it's morally respectable. So he's demarcating out all these realms. Now, it may be useful, something, a Greek amphora. If you go into a museum in Greece or any museum, a major museum in the world, there'll be these vases from ancient Greece. And they were useful. They are useful, but no one uses them now. They're works of art. But in ancient Greece, they were useful. People carried wine, they carried olive oil, they carried water. So they were useful, but they're also beautiful. And all Kant is saying is that something can be useful and at the same time beautiful, but the beauty is not based on the utility. That's the point. That's an important distinction. So he's demarcating out the realm of the beautiful, showing how it's different from cognitive judgments, how it's different from moral judgments, how it's different from judgments of something being useful, and how it's different from the pleasant. Okay, so that's the gist of the first moment. All right, I'm going to make 3 more little short ones like this. This one took a little longer than I anticipated. Sorry about the interruption with the dog, but I think you could still hear me. All right, bye.